Right, well, good evening, everybody. No, but thank you for those of you who have attended this evening. So this is the second in our series of public meetings. Delighted to be here in Haverhill, Suffolk's fourth biggest town. I've got a lot of fond memories of coming to Haverhill, and I think it's the third time I've been here in about 3 months, actually, or maybe 4. So last year with the Knife Angel, and then, of course, we celebrated Suffolk Day here back on the 21st of June. So very pleased to see everybody. The format tonight is a very brief introduction from myself and everybody else. So just make the introductions. Rachel Kitten, the Chief Constable. Ben is the local inspector. So I'm sure you know him very well indeed. And I think we've all met ourselves. And my colleague, Sandra Graffam, who is our Acting Chief Executive and Head of Communications, Public Engagement, and does her best to keep me under control. So we'll leave it at that. And just a few things I just want to mention, and then we'll hand over, after everybody else has said a few things, for questions. Please don't ask about specific incidents. That's not necessarily appropriate. As you know, the meeting is being recorded by our friend John Burns at the back. Thank you, John, very much indeed for that. And we'll just go around. Everybody will get a chance clearly to ask whatever you like. Maybe 2 chances. So there we are. A few things to highlight. Very pleased to have been re-elected back in May of this year for what, believe it or not, is the 4th term as Suffolk's Police and Crime Commissioner. And I mention that because one of the things all PCCs have to do following election is to develop a new police and crime plan. That is the high-level strategic policing document for policing in Suffolk for the next 4 years. It does, of course, include some national commitments. We've drafted it. It is now with the constabulary, so we can work together to come up with a plan that is suitable. Then it will be going out for stakeholders and public consultation, I hope, during next month. We need to get that finalised so that when it comes to budget settlements, which we will probably hear the details of as usual 4 or 5 days before Christmas, not a terribly helpful time to have it, and then we can make plans accordingly. And just to say, ladies and gentlemen, the police and crime plan, some of the themes are doing a lot more to support young people, helping them make the right choices in life. We need, as a society, to do far better about reoffending. That's quite a topical subject at the moment. That isn't, of course, just down to policing. One of the big themes, of course, is how we all work together, and that's really, really important that we continue to do that. Very briefly, the Right Care, Right Person initiative was launched last year. This is to deal with mental health. As many of you know, policing is not a mental health service, and it is about making sure those in difficulty get the right support from suitably qualified people. But I want to make it crystal clear, it's going very, very well in Suffolk. If there is a crime being committed or there is a risk to life and limb, the police, of course, will attend. So I don't want anybody to think we're walking away from it, because that's not the case. It's about better use of police time, but more importantly, looking after the individual appropriately. We are in a good position in Suffolk that we've got more police officers than ever before, so it's around 1,425. One of the challenges with having this sort of, if you like, target, and we get penalties if we don't maintain that number, we really don't want to go down the process of reversing civilianisation. In other words, we get penalties if we don't maintain that number of officers, but therefore, with the funding coming into it, we need to maximise the use of their powers, opportunities and their skills. And you won't do that if you end up having to put them behind desks in order to maintain the numbers. And this is a good example of where targets can distort behaviour. But overall, very pleased we've got those numbers. Where we will go with the new government as regards the pound notes, the funding, I have absolutely no idea. No commitment to review the iniquitous funding formula. The previous government was pretty useless at that. Well, in fact, they weren't just useless, nothing happened. I don't know whether anything will happen this time. Other themes that will still continue on, violence against women and girls is really important. We do a lot more on that collectively. I know the drugs problem with county lines is of a huge concern to everybody. What I can say, though, is the multi-agency work, a lot of it led by policing, the track record and the way this has been curtailed, I think is very, very good indeed. But we can't be complacent. The latest data I've seen is that overall in Suffolk there are 12 active county lines, 3 of them are relatively high risk, 9 not so. A far cry from when there were a few years ago about 30 county lines. And lastly, if I could just mention the leaflets on your chair. This is the brochure we bring out every year which explains the budget. It's 183.2 million quid for this year. That's everything for policing, including all the grants that we give for victims, helping young people, our crime disorder reduction grant. Very pleased that we do have organisations in Haverhill that have benefited from it. We could do with more from West Suffolk. Details are in here. Explains the role of Rachel and myself and how we go forward. I'm going to leave it at that and hand over to Rachel for a few comments, and then we'll go to Ben after that.
Thank you very much, Tim. And I normally stand up because being quite short, people can't see me, but I think I'm going to play the audience and decide that you can probably all see and hear me tonight. Really pleased to be here at Haverhill. As I've said to a few of you over coffee, just walking up and down the high street is a wonderful sense of the community that you have here. This time last year, I was introducing a new, what's called an operating model for policing, changing the format of community policing in particular, and maximising the visibility of officers over the last almost 12 months. We're coming up for the 12 months. It started in December last year. So that's in the process of evaluation at the moment, and I'm very happy to talk about how that's gone, but more importantly, hear from you, to me, how you think it's gone, and whether you think there's anything more that needs to be considered around the community engagement and reassurance that team, Ben's team in particular, delivers to Haverhill. Other considerations that we've got at the moment, I can talk about the future of crime, which is very much changing in the risks that there are, and certainly around cybercrime, online crime, and where that's developing in the future. But actually, at the moment, probably the most important person tonight is Ben, because he's the one that is your local contact, and I'll hand over to Ben to just give his own introduction, and we can then take any questions afterwards.
Over to you, Ben.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I know most faces here, so it's a joy to be here. But I think it's worthy of just giving you an idea of how Mark Keane and Mr. Passmore spoke about at strategic level, how it impacts us locally in Haverhill. The new policing model was introduced in December last year, and what that gives us in Haverhill is the ability to have a response investigation team that provides the 24 hours, 365 days a week response to emergency calls, and then on top of that there is the community-based team which are heavily involved in engagement, long-term problem solving, particularly focused around antisocial behaviour, and dealing with partnership work, and to solve those real community issues that impact us as a town, as a community, and then for in the long term reduces demand on terms of those 999 calls that come in. And that's kind of the way that it works locally. So in Haverhill, for example, there's 5 shifts each with 5 officers and a sergeant on each shift that deal with the 999 calls, and then Haverhill itself is broken down into 3 community policing areas. Each area has got its own dedicated officer that is responsible for that area. There's the northwest area that has 1 officer, the southeast area that has 2 officers, because that encompasses both Clement's estates and the town centre and the Chalkston, and then there's 1 officer that covers the whole rural patch, which is from Haverhill right the way through to Chebra, Chevington, Owlsden, up to sort of the Newmarket border and down to the Essex border. So that's a really big geographical area. Every 10 days I set a set of priorities, I review them as to what I want my focus to be on for my officers, both the response teams and the community policing team, because they work sort of hand in glove to try and deliver those priorities. And they're based on the priorities that are set at a much more strategic level above me by the senior leadership team about where they want to deal with what they see as their focus in terms of threat, harm and risk on a much wider scale. I'll give you an idea of those kind of priorities that we've got at the moment. Drug misuse and county lines, I make no apologies for that. That's always one of my highest priorities, because that brings so much vulnerability and risk to our community, both in terms of drug dealing, drug users, people being exploited, and antisocial behaviour. There's some key areas within the town that we're focusing on at the moment, and that's antisocial and drug dealing along the railway line and behind Tesco's. We've had some community intelligence coming around that area, so that's a real focus for us at the moment. Another thing that we're focusing on at the moment is the use of e-scooters in the town centre. We've had, the community have been telling us this is where we try and set our priorities, because you tell us what's important to you, and then we'll try and deal with that and give you then feedback as to what we're trying to do. So you've said to us e-scooters are a bit of an issue at the moment, so we're looking to try and focus and do some work around e-scooters. We're obviously supporting the Knife Angel initiative, which is fantastic, through doing a lot of work with schools engagement, getting into all the schools in Haverhill and delivering a schools programme that's targeted at that specific age group, or key stages. We've broken it down to around appropriate messaging around anti-knife crime, making children feel safe, understanding the impacts of knife crime. We've also done some knife sweeps of some local parks. We've done some proactive work within the town centre. So there's a whole host of stuff we're doing to support the Knife Angel initiative. And then from the rural patch, at the moment we've got some ASB and damage being caused to the sports pavilion in Clare. So that's really localised to Clare. So we're doing an initiative around that, some visibility patrols, making sure that we're engaging with the community there, speaking to our partners about how we can then safeguard and almost target harden that area to stop it becoming a habitual area where crime's committed. So that gives you an idea of the kind of priorities that I set. I review those every 10 days. And they're set because I either through crime tools, so I'm picking up on crime series or a flow, or I get a feeling of where we're going and what might be the next problem coming over the horizon. But a lot of it, the really important stuff, is about community intelligence and the community telling us. And we only do that because we're now back out in the community, engaging with it. You know, we do the market stall on a Saturday morning with everybody. We're looking at groups that we can get into. The rural officer goes around with the rural coffee van and spends time in the villages as that goes round to try and dovetail with them, because that's how we get all that really good intelligence. So that's how we're working under the new model now. And again, as Marm said, I'd be really interested to know what your thoughts were, how it's working, and how we need to change it to make it suit our community.
Good. Well, thanks very much. One of the other things I omitted to say was, of course, that we are, and I know this affects the whole of Suffolk, we are very fortunate compared with other areas. We do have the 4th lowest recorded crime rate per head of the population, according to the Office of National Statistics. I know it's not the whole story, but compared with everywhere else in England and Wales, that's not to say there aren't challenges, of course, but I do want to pay tribute to the constabulary, because if you look at the resourcing we've got compared with others, that's a remarkably good performance. But nobody's complacent up here, I can absolutely assure you about that. But I do want to just place that on record. We are fortunate compared with most other areas in England and Wales, and we need to keep it that way, of course, and that's the point. So with the extra officers and so on, that's going to be very, very important as we go forward. So now, ladies and gentlemen, it's over to you. Don't all rush at once, but any question, please. Go.
Yeah, I'm Pat Hanlon, local council here. Please keep it up, because I'm so pleased on the difference that's happened since December.
Good.
I think we're all boots on the ground here. We all go around our local community. We all go around our local communities, and where I'm talking about last year, early last year, I was going round and I could smell smoke everywhere, you know, weed.
Cannabis.
Every time I walked up the railway walk, I could always smell it. E-scooters were whizzing past. They've really died down now. I've seen one or two, and I've smelt one or two. But it's really working. Whatever you're doing, please don't change it. It's really worked as far as I'm concerned. And I do a lot of walking every day, up and down that railway walk. I also do round my ward as well, not so much, but every day I do that railway walk. And things have changed so much. So please keep it up.
Well, that's
thank you.
Very much appreciated. I don't know, Ben, whether you just want to quickly comment on that. I'm sure
No,
you're very pleased to hear that.
I'm pleased. I speak to Pat a lot, and I value his feedback, so that's really great to hear. And you know, the community being, I think we've got it right now that we've got officers in the community engaging with the community and speaking to them and understanding what concerns them and trying to feedback when we're doing stuff right, but equally when we're doing stuff wrong as well. So thanks, Pat.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Gentleman there, and then we'll come back.
Thank you, Councillor Joe Mason. Firstly, off the back of what Councillor Pat Hanlon just said, a huge thanks to your local officers, who I think it benefits them living in town. Really approachable, really engaging well with the public, and I think a real asset. And if you can pass on our thanks to your your local police officers. That'd be wonderful. I do have a question. One of the things you didn't mention was motorbikes. That is an issue around town, and it's a bit like squeezing a bubble. It happens in one area, then it seems to get squashed, and then it pops up in the other. And I have some anecdotal stuff regarding people kind of a little bit reluctant to report as well. Any number of different issues. So firstly, my question is, what progress are we making regarding motorbikes? And also, what more work can we do to try and encourage people to report things that they're concerned about so that we can assist you with the job of trying to have functional communities? Thank you.
Just before I hand over to Ben, I'm glad you may have mentioned this business about reporting crime. It's really, really important. Anything suspicious, crime, anything you're not happy about, please report it. I know it can be a protracted process, but we have put a huge amount of investment into the control room, 1.4 million quid of taxpayers' money getting on for 3 years ago. That helps. We're absolutely committed to developing and improving the control room facilities. We had discussions about that yesterday. But one of the reasons I just wanted to interject there, if I may, is because when we're trying to lobby the Home Office, I know we've got a change of government, but we've really got to keep the foot down here. The funding formula is so discredited and so, I think, unfair. If we had more resources, we could do even better. It's not about just moaning about we just want money for the sake of it. But one of the things that really helps us with the arguments with the Home Office, this is what people are telling us. And of course, this is the data. And if it's not reported, we're in a difficulty. So I'm going to hand to Ben, and then I'm sure, Rachel, you'd like to comment on that as well. So, Ben.
Just specifically about the motorbikes, we were aware of that, and that was a priority last month for us. We almost had two different issues going on. We had the anti-social bureau's use of motorcycles in the town, around the town centre, and then we had off-road motorcyclists illegally riding in Parkland out on Thurlow Estates. Initially we thought they were both joined up, but actually in reality they're not. Specifically around the issues around the town centre stuff, we've done a lot of work and partnership working with what we call a problem-solving plan, where we bring some other partners involved. I know Jack, as people know, PC Oakley was out, did a lot of work on the estates with Haverhill Housing, West Suffolk Council, getting into garage blocks where we thought the bikes were being stored, identifying those bikes, identifying those riders, and we did prosecute a number, and we took a couple of illegal bikes off the road. I'm not saying for 1 minute we've solved that, and I suspect that priority will come back to me next month, the month after. I think it also might be seasonal as well, so as we get towards the winter months, anecdotally I'd be interested to know what you think, whether that reporting continues. But it has been a priority, and it will be again.
Rachel, anything to add to that?
Thank you. I'm going to take the point about reporting crimes, because Tim's mentioned the importance of telling us what's going on, and you are the eyes and ears in the community, and that's how we can actually deal with crime or prevent further crime from happening. It has been in the past very difficult to get through to the control room, to actually make a phone call into the police control room. I know it is getting a lot better, and there's been some investment last year into the control room to make sure that we've got some additional call takers in there. But it was just to explain also that there are a number of other ways of reporting into the control room now. So it's possible to, there's the live chat, you can type in your concern. Some people, particularly, I'm stereotyping here, but I think younger people like to just get online, tap in their concern. There is somebody who answers that straight away within working hours. We haven't got it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if we eventually get to that point. And also online crime reporting as well. So sometimes, particularly for businesses or particularly for low-value crime, that can often be the most efficient and time-efficient way to let us know what's going on. But as I say, the 101 calls are reducing in the time that people are being held online, but there are lots of other ways of reporting crime as well.
I think one thing about the community policing team, sort of the utopia, is that the community officer has a responsibility for an area. They will be on their area, they'll break down some of those barriers, and the more they build those relationships, the more it will encourage people then to either report directly or or indirectly through those other avenues. So I think that's the real key, is that as community policing officers are in their area, they're engaging with their communities, as I keep saying. I know it's a bit of a... But by breaking down those relationships and those barriers, and making those relationships and breaking those barriers, we encourage people to report more, and then we know more and we can tackle more.
Yeah, that's really important. One other comment I'll just make very brief before we go to the next question. Sandra and myself, we visited the Business Improvement District in Bury a few weeks ago. And one of the challenges there, small self-employed owner-occupiers for small shops and so on, if you run a business on your own, it can be quite difficult if you've got customers in to take the time to do it. So looking at working with the BID, the Business Improvement District, if there is a way we can help individuals report to them and they can act as a conduit for it. And if you were ever interested for looking at improving town centre security and reporting here in Haverhill, we'd be very happy to discuss that, because you've got to make it as easy as possible. There's new technology available, and again, technology is going to be an answer to many, many things, which is probably beyond my capability, but just wanted to throw that into the discussion, just to say we're always happy to look at new ideas at any time. I think we had another question here, please.
Yes, my name is Sandra Linnane, youth support worker in Haverhill. Don't want to sound the same as everybody else, but do have to say thank you to Ben and the team, because they really have made a difference. I know that from working with them, so thank you. Just wanted to ask, you were saying that you have your priorities and every 10 days you look at new ones, and you said you meet with powers to be higher above, and then they'll say what needs to be done. But then you also mentioned about the community, you listen to the community. So if I wanted to raise an issue or a concern, would it then have to go higher up, or do you take charge because this is Haverhill and it's where you work?
My chief constable sets, her yearly strategy, her policing plan, and I have to take cognizance of that. But ultimately, what's important is that and often that what you're telling me will fit into my chief constable's plan in some way, shape, or form. So for example, one of the chief constable's priorities is putting the victims at the heart of everything we do. Where you can spread that across a whole breadth of crime trends. So if we're taking antisocial behaviour, people reporting antisocial behaviour, it's making sure that we're engaging those people that are victims of the antisocial behaviour, seeing how we can work in partnership to try and solve them at a local level. So yeah, so absolutely. So I have ownership of my priorities every 10 days, and I refresh them. And often, if we don't, 10 days is quite a short period of time to try and solve something for the community. And often it might roll over into 2 weeks, a month. But that process is mine to own, as long as I'm not doing something that my chief constable would be really upset about.
Which is highly unlikely.
Yeah. No, local response is really important. There's no way in a big county like Suffolk you can have one size fits all and your needs here will be different. It's bad enough dealing with the Home Office thinking that we're all the same, because we're not. But as I'm sure you know, our needs are not the same as the Met or, I don't know, Northumberland or the middle of Wales or something. And we have our own unique issues here. If you look at the national infrastructure in the county, clearly you're very close to Cambridge, which is bioscience and so on, but Felixstowe, Ipswich and Lowestoft ports, the A14, the Orwell Bridge, I don't want to talk about that anymore, it doesn't affect you here, but that's been a right pain in the last few days. So we have our own unique circumstance. And one of the other things people forget about Suffolk is a very long and complicated coastline with, I think, 30 ports and marinas or so. But if you look at our settlement pattern, we have about 480 villages and hamlets, whereas Norfolk, which is actually a bit bigger, has only got just over 300. And I think, again, that has challenges for policing because there are so many more communities, if you look at villages being communities. So that autonomy, if everything was trying to run from a central point, wouldn't work. And that's one of the great things about the Constabulary's new policing plan. I'm very pleased to hear these comments. It clearly is working. And I'm sure it will be kept up, have no fear. Dave.
Good evening. Councillor David Roach. I think one of the first things is thank you for coming out and doing these. So really appreciate it. I think there's also a positive negative in that we haven't got loads of people here shouting at you. So I think whatever you're doing is working. And we have seen, I think locally we've seen a reduction in county lines that were a real problem in town, and that's fixed. So for me, one of the things that bugs me is antisocial vehicle behaviour. So we'd like to perhaps see some more road policing out there, and I know it's difficult because we have to share some of our traffic with Norfolk, and we've got probably not enough resource to do the A14, the A12 and the A11, but we'd like to see, because we're on the edge, we seem to feel that we get missed out for that part of the policing. I think local teams are brilliant, they engage, we see them, but I think some of that other stuff we don't get, so that's one ask. And the other thing is, do you use any of the technology? So, for example, the CCTV system that covers the high street, do you look at that and pick up, you know, antisocial behaviour from that and then act on that as well?
Just one thing before I hand over to Ben on the latter one there. Regarding roads policing or speeding enforcement, antisocial behaviour, one of the things we're looking at on the Road Safe Board, which is run with the County Council and ourselves, PCC and the Constabulary, there are some more flexible methods for speeding enforcement without being draconian, but people do need to be responsible. I think in Norfolk they've got a motorbike unit which can get into really small residential areas, gateways and so on, which with the vans we can't because the regulations about safety. So we'll be looking at that and we'll let you know how we can develop that. And the money for that, of course, is ring-fenced and comes from those people who've been on a speed awareness course. The surplus on that is ring-fenced to improve road safety, and that's where some of the funding would come from. But the County Council is involved in that as well. So we'll see what we can do on that, and I'll take your point, certainly. Ben?
So in answer to the question about CCTV, yes, we do. There is a CCTV control room, which is, again, monitored 24 hours a day in Bury St Edmunds. But they have a direct radio link to officers here and the control room. But the use of technology goes wider than that. You know, everyone's got now Ring doorbells, everybody's got dash cameras. We've just, not recently, but we have brought a new piece of software now where we can put out an appeal to witnesses who can just directly send us dash cam footage or Ring doorbell footage in and send us the link. We can send them a link to upload it, and it's now the same with the CCTV. So if something's happening in the town centre, they'll alert us, we can go and deal with it, and then immediately they can then send us the footage digitally, and it can be then evidenced digitally. So it gives you kind of the impact of technology. But yes, it is used, and it does use us to alert us to incidents, and it is a really valuable, not only a deterrent, but also a prosecution tool to gathering the evidence.
Yeah, I was just going to go back to the point about the roads policing, which is a really important point. But you may know this already, but we don't qualify within Suffolk for any additional funding as being part of the National Strategic Roads Network. And what that means is that other areas, other counties such as Essex and Cambridgeshire have money and additional resources for roads policing that we don't have. It's just one of those things we have to make do with what we do have and make sure that we have the correct coverage and that it's fair. And we do share that unit with Norfolk. So they've got the whole of Norfolk and Suffolk to cover, which is a phenomenal geographical area. But I will take that one away and just check the coverage and the number of times that they've come over in this area to make sure that you are getting an equitable, fair amount of time from the roads policing team.
I can add to that, Dave, that since I've been here, they have in the past, not when Rachel was here, proposals to reduce traffic policing, and I said we're not doing that because it is so important. And as you heard Rachel say, the fact that we don't get funding for the strategic road network, I don't know what they think the A14 is. It's not some farm track. I mean, it is utterly ridiculous. But again, the obdurate nature of the Home Office, the Department of Transport, is really, really unhelpful. I hope with the change of government it might improve, but we'll see. But no, that's really, really important. And one of the reasons I'm very keen on roads policing, keeping it at least at the level we've got, is because we all know what happens if there's a collision, accident, spillage, whatever it happens to be it on the A14, A11 and A12. We've got real chaos around Ipswich at the moment with one lane westbound on the Orwell crossing. It does need proper resourcing. We get virtually no help, for example, from National Highways and their fleet because we don't have any motorways in Suffolk. I mean, frankly, what the hell's that got to do with it? But there we are. So we'll keep battling away. That's really important. Just on the CCTV, another thing I may just add as it's come up. Very pleased that we have been able to get some money from the Home Office for the Safer Streets Fund. I don't think that Haverhill actually directly benefited. We did work with West Suffolk Council. What we will do if we do get another round of funding. We had the match funded at 50% and so on, but that has helped a lot in Ipswich. This was the first year that we actually had an application from West Suffolk Council, just so you're aware of that, or the West Suffolk CSP, to be fair, which covers more than just West Suffolk itself, Baber and Mid Suffolk also. And the same from East Suffolk, they hadn't applied before. So we did get 3 applications in for the funding. And I just sometimes think maybe we, you know, the 4th biggest town, if this does come up again, and I don't know whether it will, but we'll let you know. So what that programme can do, it does help improve the street scene. It can put money into CCTV, target hardening as it's called. Obviously the police are fundamental to all of this, but other agencies, local authorities dealing with ASB, Crime Stoppers, some people are worried about reporting, can be done anonymously. So I think it's a very good scheme, as long as the Home Office, when they make an agreement, don't start to move the goalposts halfway through and 3/4 of the way through, which is what happened last time. But we'll let you know. I think we'll make sure that the Town Council and you as councillors, be you county or district or borough, know. Yeah.
Just in relation to the lack, not so much lack, but the lack of resource or having to prioritise resource, is there then perhaps a question of, for speeding or whatever, we actually had fixed speed cameras? I know they used to be only where there was accidents and they're a difficult thing. And as a driver, we all hate speed cameras, don't we? But I think for, you know, for town centres where we've got 30 limits and they're being abused, is that a deterrent that we could look at?
Can look at it. The problem with fixed camera sites, everybody knows where they are and they speed up and slow down accordingly, but they cost over 50,000 quid each. And actually one of the things we have done with Road Safe, I think we've extended it since I've been involved, to average speed camera systems. Probably the better thing to do there is see if we can do some enforcement on a randomised basis if there's a problem, but again that's talk to Ben about that. We are looking at trying to get some more resources to provide a bit more coverage accordingly, but the problem with fixed cameras, we only have 2 in Suffolk, on the A140 and on the A12 over towards Aldborough. And I know as I go past the one on the A140 nearly every day, people go hooning down the hill, slam their anchors on, then off they go again. So it certainly helped, because there's a dangerous junction there, but that's the thinking. But happy to have a discussion if there's anything else that could be done on that. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, don't hold back.
Yeah, thank you. You said earlier about mental health. This is close to my heart. Yeah, and thank you. You said if someone, you arrest someone with mental health problems, or because early last year, was it? Maybe before that, you wasn't going to get involved with any mental health, which was very sad for me. But it's good that you just said that you won't do away with it altogether. You will. Right. Well, what I'm thinking of is training of officers, neurodiverse people. I've heard a lot of them years ago, and they're still being arrested and put in prison because they have meltdowns. And obviously they can be very violent and very tough. And as the officers, so if they can recognise somehow that the person is having a meltdown because of they're anxious and what have you, they really do, adults and children especially, but adults, they're hard to handle when they have a meltdown. So if there's any way that officers could be trained in neurodiverse signs, for instance, and there is expertise out there that will teach officers of what happens when they have a breakdown, because loads of them are ending up in prison and they shouldn't be.
Thanks for that question. I'll hand to Rachel in a second. One of the I'm glad you mentioned the issue about prisons, because my understanding, and I'm not an expert, is that somewhere around about half of all inmates have got mental health difficulties to a varying degree. And my view is we have to do far better at preventing recidivism, and there are all sorts of complications. I think a quarter of the prison population were in care when they were younger. Well, that, in my view, is a really serious issue. It is a stain on society. It's not acceptable. We have to do a lot more. An ageing population. I had a sister-in-law who died at the only 18 months ago. got dementia when she was just over 50, and that went on for a few years, and she turned very, very violent. And I have to say, in that case, Suffolk Police responded really well. It was exemplary. So, painting the picture here, yes, the help will be there in extremis, but on the training, I know a few years ago we had a dementia-friendly initiative, because that's going to be an increasing problem. But I'll hand over to Rachel. We obviously are able to talk far more lucidly about that.
Well, thank you for the question, because I think it's something now that affects every single one of us. Taking your particular point about training, we now have the highest level of training for police officers that we've ever had, in terms of time, in terms of the length of period of time that they have to go through while still a student officer. So they go through a student officer training period before then being confirmed as full police officers. And there are ways of individuals being required to leave the police service during that student officer training if they don't reach the assessment levels that are set. And a large part of that is dealing with different people from different backgrounds, including those that may have mental health issues. One of the difficulties that we have looked at before, but providing specific advice around mental health conditions, we're not medics. We have to treat every single scenario and every single individual according to what they're going through at that moment in time of crisis. And actually, I think that's a strength, because we aren't there to deliver health support. We're there to deliver safety, to deliver potentially criminal justice processes, but we do need to understand when people may react in erratic ways. So the central part to their training, and also to everything that we do, that Ben does, I do myself every day, is our set of values for Suffolk Constabulary. The values are very simple, just 4 values, which centre around community, compassion, courageousness and professionalism. And compassion is a very key part of that when dealing with people who are undergoing a crisis of any sort. And it may be mental health basis, it may be because it's a significant event in their lives that they can't cope with. And I'm very pleased to say that by having a simple set of values that everybody can relate to and be guided by, helps us through not only our training but the delivery of operational policing as well.
Thank you. Anything else? Jim.
Thank you. One of my interests is families and communities at West Suffolk Council. What dialogue do you have with the families and communities team there? The reason I ask that is the perceptions of antisocial behaviour can be very, very wide. People can perceive something as antisocial, and actually it isn't, and it ends up being a little bit of a nuisance call. And it's certainly a conversation I've had with officers at West Suffolk regarding them wanting to support communities, and they sometimes get stuff reported to them that actually doesn't fit the criteria of what is antisocial behaviour. Is there scope for a comms programme to actually clarify what does constitute antisocial behaviour, or would that open a can of worms where it could cause more problems? Because there seems to be a lack of reporting, going back to the reporting thing, or people are reporting things that aren't necessarily really antisocial behaviour. And I just wonder what liaison you have with West Suffolk, the Families and Communities team, when you're working in partnership. Thank you.
I'll hand to Rachel and Ben for that, but one of the things in the new policing model you may not be aware of, there is a real emphasis, and it will be in the new policing crime plan, about partnership working. And that really, really is fundamental, because as I often say, we all say actually, you're not going to police your way out of all the difficulties. So if you look at, for example, young people and antisocial behaviour, and we need to make it quite clear, young people do not have the sole preserve on antisocial behaviour. There's some adults who should jolly well behave themselves, but they don't. But for me, I think one of the things there is, what have we done in society over the last 15, 20 years? You look at the damage that COVID did for education and so on. We all have different views on that. My view was that lockdowns went on far too long. We are where we are now, however, can't undo that. But one of the reasons for our grant programme is really important to work with youngsters particularly those who perhaps haven't got the opportunities and family support or whatever it happens to be, that I was very fortunate to have many years ago when I was young, because there is a lot of good there in these youngsters and we haven't realised it, and that's where working together with some of the money that we can put in to help, be it youth groups or whatever it happens to be, I don't really mind, and it can really help them make the right choices in life as we go forward. And as a result, and we can see that all over the county, that does reduce difficulties, vulnerability, exploitation, crime and antisocial behaviour, which in turn reduces demand on policing, but more importantly, as they enter adulthood, they like to become far more productive and good citizens, to coin a phrase. So I think there is a lot in that, but as regards relationships with other parts of the public sector, Rachel, I mean, we can both talk for hours on it, but it is really important. And then I'll hand to Ben about what's happening locally.
Well, I was going to suggest perhaps, Ben, do you want to start with the local delivery, and then I'll deal with the broader point about antisocial.
About turn.
So on a local level, we have a really good relationship with the communities team within West Suffolk Council. I participate in a monthly meeting, an ASB panel meeting, which is chaired by members of the communities team. And I represent the police's point of view, but around that table there's also housing, social care, NHS, and other partner agencies, social housing as well as West Suffolk Housing as a provider, so people like Haverhill Housing, Sanctuary Housing. We sit and discuss cases that are coming up, because obviously ASB is such a wide breadth of terminology. It's not necessarily a policing matter. I mean, in terms of pure legislation, there aren't always offences that we can arrest for or take down the criminal justice route, but it is a real partnership approach to try and resolve it. We were talking earlier, but a good example at the moment is one of the ASB issues we've got is around the Jubilee Park and the park there. And we're having a lot of conversations around that because there's some stickers being put up with a QR code that links back to cannabis dealing. There's some waste being dumped on the park. There's some broken play equipment. The trees are overgrown, so there's areas that are secluded. So that's a real partnership approach how we resolve that. It's around, mending the play equipment. It's about cutting down some of those trees so that people can see in and see what's going on. There's a bit in the planning process that we've found where planning permission is only given on the proviso that it's locked every night, or we need to try and establish who's supposed to lock it. It's about cleaning off those stickers and getting resolved, and then us doing the enforcement around the drug dealing that's going on there and being visible. So that's kind of the partnership approach we have, and it works really well, and it's really close.
Rachel.
Yeah, and Ben touched on some of this. One person's antisocial behaviour is very often not somebody else's antisocial behaviour, and that is part of the challenge. That and in other parts of the county, we see people gathering in groups on the street, and that can be seen as antisocial behaviour. And actually, it's just part of that community's way of mixing and mingling. And that's part of the challenge with antisocial behaviour, is actually understanding what there may be criminal, what there may sit with another agency, what might just be about communities mixing at different ages and demographics to understand each other and all live in the same place happily together. And I think that's why it's so difficult to define, but at the same time, your point, why it's so very vital that we all work together and not just police it, because I think as soon as we put that criminal justice focus on it, we've defined who are the victims and who are the offenders and where the police sit in that equation. And that's not what I'm interested in doing. This is about us learning to live with each other safely together.
Okay, yeah.
The Reverend Max Drinkwater, Rector of Haverhill and Withersfield, and I would like to talk about faith groups. So Haverhill is becoming more culturally diverse, and I think other faith groups in particular are becoming more visible in the community. There's a halal supermarket on the high street, and it's not the only business of that kind on the high street. So my question is simply, what are you doing to help particularly minority faith groups to keep them safe and help them play an active part in the community safely?
Relevant all over Suffolk, and certainly from our point of view in the PCC's office, reaching out meeting people, getting to understand them, that helps build up development of trust and so on. It's really, really important. So if there are any groups that would like to meet up, very happy to come to Haverhill and talk to them. If you have a multi-faith group, that's absolutely fine. And I think one of the reasons I just wanted to comment on this is that the appalling situations we've seen elsewhere, going back 6-8 weeks ago in other parts of the country, I think we're all very relieved but very pleased that this didn't happen in Suffolk. And I do think a lot of that is down to the fact you have community policing immersed in the communities, building up those links. You know, forget all the political stuff and so on. If you meet people and you get to know them, that bond of trust helps. Sandra and I, for example, the other day went to see the Bond Street Mosque people in Ipswich. We meet with them twice a year, as an example. We were in Newmarket a few weeks ago for one of our street meets, and met the imam from the local mosque there, and they have a faith group. So any platform like that, if we can do anything to help build those relationships, I absolutely agree with you. It's fundamental. That's the Suffolk way, in my view. It's working together. So, Ben, the local dimension there, I happened to see that shot as I walked along here from the car park. But, yeah.
It's very much delivery at a local level, as Mr. Passmore said. It's about us being in the community and making strides to break down those barriers and make contact with those communities, those faith groups. The events of 6-8 weeks ago, I think, not taught me a little bit of a lesson, but it made me reach out into the community to actually try and really focus and understand what we've got in our community, because I wanted to protect them, and that threw up some groups that we just didn't know were there. So that's just a piece of work that I'm going to continue to build on. Locally, and that almost allowed us to reach out and make those contacts, because there was a reason to. You know, we're very much the message was we're here to help, we're here to protect, we want to hear what's going on. Have you got any concerns about what's going on nationally? Is there any impact having you locally? Is there anything we can do to support you? And that started that conversation, which actually is a real positive that came out of the events of 6 to 8 weeks ago.
In fact, Rachel, you had a whole initiative across the whole county, I think, didn't you?
That's right, across the Suffolk, but also I'm the national lead amongst all chief constables in the UK for race, religion and belief. And so even just this afternoon, I was sitting on what we called a gold group meeting, a national meeting to discuss the role of the impact, in fact, of 6 to 8 weeks ago and what we might do differently going forward. So I've had a number of very high-level meetings with government representatives in the multi-faith arena and looking at some initiatives that are running elsewhere in the country that we might be able to bring into Suffolk. So there's a lot happening. As I'm sure you know very well, it's about moving through over a long period of time. So going back to the local policing model, things like the consistency of having leadership that doesn't change within policing, having visible police officers, but also our own local internal support for officers and members of staff of faith groups. They come together on a regular basis so that they share common experiences and also different experiences, but get to know each other better, and then within the organisation influence others to help them learn about the requirements and the differences between different religions and no religions. So it's something that's very active across Suffolk Police, and I have had a lot of very good positive feedback, and I think it goes back to that central point about us all learning to live and work together safely and supporting each other.
Thank you for that question, very pertinent at this time. John.
Yeah, hi. You probably know me. As usual, numerous things. I think, first of all, it's already been said, the community policing team, certainly in Haverhill, has been, to me, an outstanding success. I was very hesitant about it when I heard about it on the police and crime panel and maybe accountability at Martlesham. And it's not just people like Ben and Steve Fox, his sergeant, people like Jack Oakley and Cheryl Claydon, all the other team members are part of that. And it's not about going back to the old Dixon and Doc Green days. They're not out on the streets, walking the streets, having a cup of tea in people's houses and things. That's not, you're never going to do that. But I think it's been a wonderful success, and I just wish we had more local officers. But until we get a decent funding formula and everything. That's never going to happen. I think you also mentioned, and it was mentioned about CCTV. You know as well as I do, Tim, about the problems I've had, which I've been working on behalf of Ben and his team, about places like Jubilee allotments and Park. And I'm really pleased to hear that you're going to be emphasising more, not that you haven't in the past, partnership working, and people being not just standing back because that's what the rules are, actually thinking about what they're doing, particularly West Suffolk. I've mentioned this before. A couple of things. One is, whatever happened, and I don't know whether the county councils may know this, whatever happened to the Suffolk County Council ANPR speed cameras? They had 10 of them. They were supposed to be putting around. We never saw any in this town at all. They seem to. I know it was a limited funding, but I don't know whatever happened to the scheme, whether they do anything, and I don't know whether you do as part of the road safe side of things. And the other thing is, and I've mentioned this many times at PCP and other things, is because we are 20 miles away from the Police Investigation Centre at Bury, is the amount of time that officers are off. I know it happens elsewhere, but it's 40-mile round trip to take somebody who they've arrested, and including all the time to process them and everything else. And often a police officer, or officers often, will be out. That's it, their shift is gone. And that, when we got limited local policing, that is a big problem to our area. We often have, and I don't know the figures, I'm sure Ben does, sometimes maybe only one officer in the whole town who can actually do anything. I mean, yes, we have response and all that sort of stuff, but so I don't know what we can ever do about that because we lost the cells here, of course, and can't do anything. So anyway, thank you.
Yes, so on the cells, the custody suites are just state-of-the-art facilities. I think they were built just before I started. I think they were completed about 2011. And my understanding is that they are really, really good facilities, because you've got to remember, people who are detained are not necessarily charged. It's before they're charged or released, so they have to be treated properly. And it's much easier to do that with the custody suites, be they at Bury or Martlesham or wherever, and this run jointly with Norfolk. So there are, I think it's 6 of them overall, 2 in Suffolk, the bigger ones, and the others, there's one in Yarmouth just over the border, for example. Yeah, I get your point about that, but it does come down to resources. What we have to do, though, is make sure that people, you don't want death in custody or any incidents like that. And all I can say is, from my point of view, from what I've seen, the facilities are far, far better than they were before. And I think they're probably some of the best in the whole country. So we should be pleased about that. Yes, there are those consequences. But until we get a better funding formula and more officers, that is going to be a problem, because that's just the way the system works. So on balance, I think it's a big improvement from where we were before. As regards the County Council ANPR scheme, as far as I'm aware, that is still going. There were 10 devices. It's a lot better than none. Now, I don't know why you haven't had any in Haverhill. It is run by the County Council, and I think it is due for discussion at the next Road Safe Board, because that would have been going for over a year. Then we'll look at the data. I'm actually very supportive of it, and I think if we could find money, it's funded by the County Council, to get some more, that would be a good idea. Population's expanding in Suffolk, and it does need to be spread around all 4 corners of Suffolk, and I don't know what the distribution has been, but that's something you'd have to take up with the County Council. 10 devices, I think you're correct, is very few to cover the whole county. So they're there for a short while, then they move to other sites, and I think you have to register for it, and there's a queue system, if you like, for want of a better word, but that's something to take up outside the meeting. I don't know if either of you like to comment further on that. The custody suites, we are where we are.
The custody, yeah, I mean, it is exactly as you describe it, but the care is, the point that Tim's made, the care is the most important thing. The facilities are hugely expensive, and we have 3 of them in fact, we only have 2 of them in the county. The other one in Great Yarmouth we use, it's just over the border in Norfolk, and again, it's another team. The whole custody staff is another team that we share with Norfolk. police as well. So we make savings through that. It won't be possible in the short term at least to be able to build another facility over on this side, but there are some other ways that officers can manage their time. So there are it isn't just arrest and have to take them to the custody centre in Bury. There can be times when it's actually appropriate to interview them outside of that process or to treat them more locally. But Ben will have more details on how the staff manage their time around that.
So the response teams that, as I described earlier, they're spread across the whole of the county, and there is a whole process where they will move staff around to fill the gaps. So, John, as you rightly identified, that is exactly what happens. But often what happens, or what should happen and does happen, is that response teams will move staff to cover gaps where, because it's not just isolated to Haverhill, it happens in every other town that other than Bury St Edmunds. And it's just something we deal with within West Suffolk in terms of managing that threat, harm and risk. And that's an ongoing process that's always being reviewed, both at a local sergeant level, at an area inspector level, and within the control room based at Martlesham. But as Ma'am says, there are a number of ways where arrest is the last option, really, in our armoury, the last tool that we should be using. There are a number of ways we can deal with offences and suspects and offenders outside of the custody process that keeps officers in Haverhill. And there is an interview room at Haverhill Police Station, which is often used for people that are under suspicion, where we can gather evidence we don't have to arrest. So arrest is used when there is threat, harm and risk, and we're looking to secure evidence we don't think we can secure any other way. And there's a whole range of processes before we get to that point, which officers will try and explore first.
And of course, if we could get more officers, that would help alleviate it. I'm sure Ben would love to have more officers down here. So, but I mentioned right at the very beginning of the meeting the number of 1425. Please remember that, because it takes 3 years to train an officer, so hopefully the situation will ease somewhat in the forthcoming years. And as I said right at the beginning, also bearing in mind the expansion of population, Haverhill now our 4th biggest town. That's something that is always under review. Now, do we have any other questions before? Have you ever got any, Emily? Well, lovely to see you. Well, look, I think we've more or less drawn to a close now, but if there are any other things, please just stay behind and talk to one of us. Could I thank you all very much indeed? We've had a whole hour. There's some really, really good questions. So quality, not quantity, is clearly what happens here in Haverhill. So really, really pleased, and we're very grateful for you turning up and for your time as well. So thank you very much. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.